It is a tale as old as time itself, the story of the most feared goddess of the ancient world. But what if I told you there was more to her than met the eye? Welcome to my channel. And today, let's find out the dark side of the seemingly perfect Queen of Olympus. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss any new stories. Hera's fury unleashed, a queen's quest for vengeance in the heavens. On the ethereal plains of Elysium, where the celestial river Lethe flowed like liquid gold, Hera sat as the embodiment of divine perfection. Her laughter echoed with tinkling bells as her godly consort, Zeus, king of the Olympians, regaled their company with tales of his heroic deeds. The other goddesses, her sisters and her loyal handmaidens, all smiled and cheered, reveling in the glory of their mighty husband. Hera, though, the majestic queen of Olympus, felt a cold fury rise within her. She may be the most beautiful of all the goddesses, but in this moment, she was also the most miserable, because among those gathered around Zeus were not only her sisters and her attendants, but also a poor mortal princess whom Zeus had just that day transformed into a heifer after having deflowered her. None could hide anything from her. Not Zeus, not his lovers, not even the mortals who walked upon the earth. She saw the arrogant pride on Zeus's face as he boasted of his conquests. She felt the sting of betrayal as his fellow gods laughed and encouraged him. And she tasted the bitter dregs of despair as her own divinity seemed to mock her. For when Zeus did such things, what was she, Hera, the great goddess of marriage, the protector of women, to do? To sit idly by and watch as her husband shamed her very nature? No. If Zeus wanted to play the role of the insatiable lover, then Hera would see to it that he paid the price of a true king. Thus began one of the darkest periods in the history of the cosmos. A long saga of torment and tribulation brought upon mortals and immortals alike by a queen scorned. Hera unleashed her wrath upon the world. She sent vipers to murder the hero Heracles, drove the Trojan prince Paris to abduct Helen and kickstart the legendary war, caused the giant typhoon to ravage the Mediterranean, and even sentenced the titan Prometheus to eternal torment for defying her. But these were merely appetizers. The main course was reserved for her husband, Zeus. In the fullness of time, Hera's wrath caught up with Zeus himself, for she made him pay the ultimate price, the death of his son, Ares, the god of war. Now, however, the time had come for Hera to answer for her actions. As punishment for her crimes against Olympus and humanity alike, she was put on trial before the Panhellenic Council, an assembly of all the most powerful gods, presided over by none other than Zeus himself. In accordance with divine law, the prosecution was led by Hermes, the messenger of the gods, while the defense was taken over by Athena, the goddess of wisdom. The charges against her were grave, including the murder of her stepchildren, Ares and Althea, the desecration of the temple of Apollo, the ruin of Troy, and the unleashing of monsters and madness upon mankind. Yet despite the gravity of the situation, a strange calm had fallen over Hera. As she listened to the litany of her alleged crimes, there was no fear or remorse in her eyes, only cold fury. This was not the time for regrets or apologies. This was the moment for justice. And so it began. One of the greatest trials in the history of the cosmos, a battle of epic proportions between the mightiest goddess in the pantheon and the combined forces of heaven and earth. What followed was a spectacle unlike any other. With every word, Hera wove a tapestry of deceits, exposing the sins and hypocrisies of her accusers. She turned the tables on Zeus, reminding the court of how he had been the first to violate the sacred laws of hospitality by kidnapping her sister, Elora, and how he had imprisoned her in a bronze tower on the top of Mount Ida, until she bore him the twin gods, Artemis and Apollo. She pointed out the many times he had been unfaithful to her, fathering children with both goddesses and mortals. And she reminded the court of how Zeus had not always been the supreme leader of the cosmos, but had once been a young, untested god who had had to win the allegiance of the other deities through cunning and strategy. Much like a mortal king must do. He had done everything, she said, to secure his position, even going so far as to cheat his brothers out of their birthright and imprison them forever in the great abyss beneath the earth. With each accusation, the faces of the gods grew darker, their expressions hardening into masks of anger and shame. Yet still, Zeus sat impassively on his throne, his expression unreadable. Was he truly the benevolent leader of the cosmos, or was he, like the rest, tainted by the poison of Hera's words? Only he knew the answer. Yet it was not enough. Hera knew that she could never defeat Zeus in a straightforward battle of wills. She had tried it before and had lost. So instead, She played her last card, a gambit so daring that if it failed, it would destroy her forever. With a dramatic flourish, she called forth witnesses to the stand. Witnesses from the past, figures from her own personal history who would reveal the truth of her character to the court. First came Semele, the mortal princess whom Zeus had loved so passionately that he had carried her to his lair in the Caucasus Mountains, hidden away from the prying eyes of the cosmos. Hera watched with cold amusement as Semele took the stand and recounted her affair with Zeus, right down to the moment when he had made love to her in all of his godhead, causing her to burst into flames and die. Next came Althea, Zeus's daughter from a mortal woman named Aegina, who had been murdered by Hera in a fit of jealous rage. With a tragic sob, Althea recounted her short life, her deep love for her father, and her innocent joy at becoming a full-fledged goddess. Then, to everyone's surprise, came Io, the mortal princess whom Zeus had turned into a heifer after violating her. Despite being half in love with the goat-legged god, Io had rejected his advances and prayed to Hera for protection. Hera, touched by her piety and courage, had answered her prayer and granted her immortality. Finally, there was Metis, the Titaness, whom Zeus had tricked into marrying him, and then swallowed whole, fearing that she would bear children who would usurp him, just as she had done with her father, Cronus. With a voice filled with bitterness and hatred, Metis recounted her imprisonment in Zeus's stomach, how she had been forced to live inside his body for years, slowly losing her identity and purpose until she was nothing more than a shadow of her former self. And so the trial dragged on, with witness after witness taking the stand to recount their experiences with Hera. Zeus sat impassively on his throne, his expression unreadable. Yet as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, a change began to come over his face. His usual arrogance and bluster had been replaced by a haunted look of guilt and shame. One by one, the gods on the council began to nod their heads in agreement, their faces softening with understanding. Even Poseidon, who had always been fiercely loyal to his brother, now looked away in sullen silence. At last, the time came for closing arguments. Hermes the prosecutor spoke first, reminding the court of all the evil that Hera had wrought, all the lives she had ruined. Then it was Athena's turn. She spoke eloquently and passionately in Hera's defense, reminding the court of all the good that Hera had done, her countless acts of kindness and generosity, her unwavering commitment to her duties as a goddess. But it was not enough. Hera's crimes were simply too great. Too many gods had suffered at her hands. And so the verdict was unanimous. Hera was found guilty on all counts. As the sentence was read, Hera's face strained of color. She had known, of course, that this was the likely outcome. She had never expected the other gods to believe her side of the story. She had known that they would side with Zeus, that they would condemn her and banish her from Olympus. But still, as she heard the words that sealed her fate, a part of her couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She had given so much to the gods, so much to the universe. And now, after all that, they were casting her out. Surely there was no hope for reconciliation, no possibility of redemption. With the trial over, Hera was stripped of her godly powers and cast down from Olympus, condemned to wander the earth as an ordinary mortal. And yet, as she stood there on the precipice of her new existence, something in her snapped. The icy grip of betrayal and humiliation tightened around her heart, squeezing the warmth and light from her being. Gone was the gentle, compassionate goddess. In her place stood a shell of her former self, cold, hard and vengeful. With a single, terrible purpose, Hera was determined to make the gods suffer as much as she had.